Hi there. Thank you for being here. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 16 of the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. On this episode, I'll be sharing a little bit more of my personal story, as well as how I've started implementing lessons I've learned over the years from being a cowgirl into all areas of my life. If you're trying to figure out how to take actionable steps in your life when it comes to giving yourself the space and grace that you need, this is an episode you'll want to give a listen.
Hey y'all, and welcome. You're listening to the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm your host, Dakota Dawn Johnson, small town cowgirl with southern roots, blazing a trail as a Midwest ranch wife, mama, and businesswoman. The mission of Cowgirl Confessions is to share the wonderfully wild and western life stories of cowgirls from all walks of life. We'll talk about the highs, the lows, and everything in between when it comes to navigating careers, cowboys, kids, and cattle. Legendary cowgirl Dale Evans said it best: "Cowgirl is a pioneer spirit, a special brand of American courage." The cowgirl faces life head on, lives by her own lights, and makes no excuses. Cowgirls take stands. They speak up. They defend the things they hold dear. A cowgirl might be a rancher, a barrel racer, a bull rider, or an actress, but she's just as likely to be a checker at the local Winn-Dixie, a full-time mother, a banker, an attorney, or an astronaut. If you're into wet saddle blankets, talks with God, buckets full of laughter, and the life lessons learned in the process, kick off your boots and settle in. I pray these stories encourage, empower, and give you just the leg up you need. Here's to embracing the cowgirl state of mind, no matter how wild and western life may get along the way.
Hello, friend. Thank you so much for being here. Before I share with you more about my story and some ideas today, I just want to know, how are you feeling? Have you checked in with yourself lately? Have you made that pause to just really try to take it all in, take a deep breath, and evaluate where you're at? Things like doing this solo podcast, they're out of my comfort zone. And that may seem silly for somebody who enjoys telling stories, but I really like being able to have a conversation and share other people's stories more than just sharing my own. But I've learned that when God puts a calling on your heart, or really just puts a kind of jab in your side, you better answer, you better listen, and then you better take action, because it's something that's not going to go away. Hence this solo podcast today, and sharing with you guys more of my story, how he's been at work in my life in so many different areas. I mean, it goes without saying, even when, I don't mention him, he's there. He's shown up time and time again for me in so many different ways. And, for years, I've really kind of struggled when I've heard people talk about give yourself space and give yourself grace. And while I wanted to do those things, I just couldn't really grasp how to actually take action and implement those things into my life to where they wouldn't get put on the back burner. I'm such a visual learner. And a few years ago, really, when I entered into motherhood, and I'll share more about that in a little bit, but once I entered into motherhood, I realized that I was going to have to do some things different if I was going to show up as the best version of myself. And really learning how to implement space and grace into my life for myself has become a way for me to be a better version. And like I said, I'm a real visual learner. I grew up through the ranks of junior high school, college rodeo, just super involved with horses. And just about anything I do, if I can tie it back to something to do with a horse or a way that I learned something growing up, it's going to stick with me. So I want to share with you really, how I kind of came up with these 3 steps in, giving myself space. And it really just all starts with the question of, how am I feeling? And that's why I want you to ask yourself that today. How am I feeling? Where am I at? Where do I want to be? and how am I going to get there? And whenever you start asking yourself those things, it's going to require you to take some action on those questions. At first, for me, is, when it comes to space, is giving myself the space to feel, followed by the space to reflect, and then the space to transition. And the way that I've, visually connected this in my mind through, years of being around horses is when you give yourself the space to feel, we do that all the time when it comes to our horses, whether you feel your knee throbbing because you hit a barrel in the same spot you hit, a few days before, or there's that feeling of accomplishment as you finish a solid run and you hear the announcer say you just took the lead. You're feeling two different emotions there. And it's important to feel both of them, because one, you want to avoid in the future. You don't want to feel like that again. So, and then the other one, you want to bottle that up and save it for the times that you're feeling really down on your luck. And you need to remember what it feels like to be a winner, and what it feels like to know how to succeed at something, and have belief in your horse and have belief in yourself. And those are just two really different end of the spectrum examples that take place in the practice pen or in the rodeo arena when you're giving yourself that space to feel. Second is that space to reflect. So I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure so many of you listening can relate, that, back before iPhones, you'd run a battery down on the video camera on the way home from a barrel race or a rodeo or roping, watching your runs. I know I did this, watching my runs and discussing with my mama. We'd reflect on what had happened and what we could work on, and what I should be celebrating for me and my horse, whether it was a little win or a big win. And that's the kind of thing that, there's so many opportunities to learn when you actually start giving yourself the space to reflect on what has happened and how far you've come, whether it be over a period of a week, a month, years, a decade, if as long as you're going back and reflecting on that and taking what's happened and trying to learn from it, you'll never lose there. You're constantly going to improve. Even if it's a slow process, you're still gaining ground. And that third part of giving myself space is the space to transition. So, you just change and adjust things to help you be better the next time around. That's the pretty simple form of what a transition is. And, when it comes to horses, maybe it's a bit, or you had to shorten a rope, or how soon you give your horse the signal to rate headed to the first barrel. There's so many different things that we're accustomed to transitioning after we get done competing so that we can be better the next time. And as I started to really think about, okay, these steps that I'm trying to apply to my life, the space to feel, the space to reflect, the space to transition, this isn't anything new. I've been doing this, as long as I can remember, when it came to competing and preparing to go to the next rodeo, or trying to finish a horse out or teach them something new. I gave this space to these horses, but for some reason, all these years I've struggled giving myself that space. And that's when the light bulb went off for me. I can be doing this for myself as well. I need to be doing this if I'm going to continue to get better and really see lasting change in what I'm doing, and not just feel like I'm starting back over all the time. The second part of this whole process is giving myself and you giving yourself grace as you embrace each stage of the space process, if you will. So, you think about, again, tying it back to horses. If you change a bit on a horse that has been running up the rail at the first barrel, that horse is not necessarily just going to fly in there and, make a turn the very first time. You're going to have to do some slow work. You're going to have to build that horse's confidence up. and have that expectation of knowing where you're headed, but knowing that it's not going to change overnight just because you put a new bit on the horse. You got to give that horse some grace. You got to think about muscle memory and all these different factors that lead into building that horse up to get them ready down the road. No different than, if a horse has got a problem in the box, it's not going to be solved overnight. It's going to take some time. And you, as the rider and the leader of that team, you've got to give that horse some grace while y'all are figuring it out together. The same goes for us as we start applying this space and grace strategy to our lives. We have to give ourselves the grace and the permission to be a work in progress. Now, I'm not saying confuse making up excuses with giving yourself grace. There's a difference there. As long as you're putting in the time, you're making the effort to transition based on the things you've reflected on, because you gave yourself the space to feel. So you know what you need to be doing. And guys, you're not going to know all of it. I don't claim to know all of it. A lot of what I've learned is because I've sought out mentorship. I've shared some of the feelings I've had. Counseling is a beautiful thing. You're not expected to just know all this stuff. But once you start getting the tools in place to give yourself that space, then you have to remember that grace is a very essential part of the process. Now that I sound like I've been on a soapbox, and I don't ever want it to sound like that on here. I just feel really passionate about this because I've seen what a difference it can make in my life. And I know I can't be the only one out there that ties everything back to horses and is such a visual learner. So I hope that picture I just painted of how you can take the space and grace you're giving your equine athletes in the arena, you can take that visual and start applying those steps to your life. The space to feel, the space to reflect, the space to transition, and giving yourself the grace throughout that entire space process. I want to share with you a little bit more of kind of my story now, growing up, and just different life lessons and kind of some thoughts I have on basically imagine what the world would be like if everyone entered in the arena of life. I actually spent some time in the practice pen. When I think about that and just all the life lessons I've learned from my time spent there, I truly think the world would be a much different place than it is today. I grew up in a small community in Alabama, and there weren't a ton of kids in our area that rodeoed, but there was a handful. And all of our parents made sure that we had what we needed in order to learn through the process. Just to give you an idea, we didn't have a whole lot growing up, and I share that because it just is what it is. We didn't ever do without, but looking back as a parent and an adult now, I know that my mom and so many other parents out there, they were thinking about the long-term gain for us as kids and what we were going to learn through that experience of going to junior rodeos and high school rodeos, and them sacrificing not only their weekends and their time, but a lot of money just to get us up and down the road to go compete. And I'm so grateful for every single experience I had. And, my mom and so many other parents that put in the time, for me and my friends growing up so that we could do that. Like I said, when I was growing up, we didn't have much. We actually didn't even have arena lights. Heck, we didn't really even have what I'd call an arena to anyone else. It was a practice pen with an area that was just good enough level ground to set up a pole pattern. It wasn't much, but it worked for us. I spent hours in that practice pen, and whether I was figuring out how to not eat dirt when I did a flying dismount, finishing my turns in the barrels, or shaving off time weaving through the poles, through all of it, I was learning way more than what I thought I was, which was practicing for the next junior high school rodeo that weekend. I learned that nothing worth having comes easy. I learned that you can eat a lot of dirt in the process of refining a skill, and dang it, sometimes you're still going to fall again. I learned that you have to get back up and keep going no matter what. I learned that time management was incredibly important because for years I had a really short window to practice between getting home from school and when the sun went down. So I figured out how to do my homework during lunch. I learned that just because I'd put in the time didn't mean I'd always win. I learned that even when goats got up and horses were hurt and we had flat tires on the way to rodeos and I felt defeated, that was when I had to decide if I'd let outside circumstances define me or if I'd fan my internal flame through it all. It was a choice. I could get gritty and keep going, or I could feel sorry for myself at the trailer. I also learned how to appreciate the little things in life, as well as the power of being kind to others. Little things like coming home from school to the surprise of one new to us arena light. Y'all, I imagine it's how a 12-year-old these days would feel about a new iPhone. I was so excited. A friend of ours worked at the power company, and he'd been on a job for a guy in our community changing out all of his lights. And they decided that that one light that actually still worked ought to come to our house instead of being trashed. Now, obviously, this took way more time and effort because not only did they bring it to our house, they installed it for us. I'm not sure they ever really knew how much that single act of kindness blessed my life, because it allowed me not only more time to practice, but it allowed more time for my mom and my brothers and so many other, friends of ours to come over and practice in the evening. So it gave us more time together. I share all this because the time I spent in the practice pen and getting to compete across the US growing up as a kid in the sport of rodeo, it helped prepare me for the greatest stage of all, and that's the arena of life. There's nothing like the lessons you learn in the process and along the way. And as I've started implementing this whole space and grace idea into my life, it's the little things that I look back on and I think about what a big difference they've made. And really, like I said, when I became a mom in February of 2019, so just 2 years ago, I really started giving myself that space at the beginning of the year to evaluate where I was at and not just feeling like I had to start in January 1 with this new set of goals and hustling and all these things, because January and the very beginning of February have been moments in my life over the past, 10, 11 years that have been significant. I've had some really incredible, milestones happen where I could celebrate, hard work finally paid off. And then I've had some moments at the beginning of the year over the past decade that have just brought me to my knees. And, for you, your month might be August or it might be April or November. I'm not sure what your story is. And I hope to get to know your story and you better in the process. But mine happens to be at the beginning of the year. And that's why I guess I've just felt called that I needed to share this with you guys, and it needed to be shared now because I've literally the past, 5 to 6 weeks been walking through this space and grace strategy, if you will, that I've started implementing in my life. And, you can give yourself, and I highly recommend giving yourself space and grace all year long. But I mean, I've really been diving in these past few weeks to look at where I'm at, where I want to be, and how I'm going to get there, and how I'm feeling through this whole process. I'm not going to dive real deep into the past 10 years because that's a lot to unpack, but I do want to share with you a little bit of, kind of what I've walked through. And then, if you guys have more questions about these and want me to take spend more time on another episode explaining some of that and what I've walked through, I'll be happy to do that. So be sure to reach out to me on social media or email me, and just let me know what questions you might have and any feedback from today's episode. So we'll go back to kind of start around 2010. And as many of you might know that are listening, I had the opportunity in 2010 to serve as Miss Rodeo USA, which is basically a job where I got to promote the sport of rodeo and the International Professional Rodeo Association. So that year I traveled across the US and Canada, getting to share with young and old alike what rodeo was about, why I was passionate about it, and why I thought that our entire nation could benefit from just the mentality of cowboys and cowgirls. I also spent that year sharing my platform, which was called Golden Heart, and that was encouraging people to open their heart and live by the golden rule. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. And now I've mentioned before that I've always had a love for storytelling, but what was really unique about that year is that based on the different people I got to be in contact with, and hearing their stories, and then having some opportunities literally fall into my lap, the idea that I could start sharing stories, not just, enjoy them, but I could be a voice for those stories, really, that's when that came into existence, was that year. And some of the opportunities that started that year were, writing for the Rodeo News magazine. I'll always be grateful that Siri Stevens, let me use that her platform basically to share parts of my stories as well as others. And then in the next few years to follow, I even got to do some freelance work for championship bull riding. I had a blog called Code on the Road, and I did some work in the press room at the National Finals Rodeo. It was incredible, the people that I got to come in contact with, the stories that they shared with me, and just learning how to articulate those stories in a written format to share with other people. I also learned that year how to travel really efficiently, and that's something I've carried over into my life well on until today as I work as a traveling sales rep. Fast forward 2 years, and I actually qualified for the inaugural year of the International Finals Rodeo Cowgirls Breakaway Roping. And this was such a unique experience because during the year that I was Miss Rodeo USA, I had the opportunity and the ability to share the idea with the IPRA board that, there were women out there that were going to these rodeos with their husbands or their boyfriends or their dads, and they wanted the opportunity to enter something at a professional level besides just the barrel racing. And part of my job as Miss Rodeo USA was to be a voice for the contestants. And while I didn't have a vote on that board or anything like that, I did have the ability to share, this idea. And the board listened. And while there were a lot of people that really couldn't get behind the vision, it seemed way too far-fetched that, and time bound, because I was like, hey, let's I want to get this put to action, which meant that I say we, but the board had to declare that the IPRA was going to say, hey, starting for the new year for 2011, when women can buy their cards to compete in the Cowgirls Breakaway Roping and qualify for the breakaway roping in January of 2012. So a lot had to happen in 2010 to even have the format available and the ability for people to buy cards to try to go after qualifying for that very first year that the breakaway roping was held at the IFR. So I got on the bandwagon. I wanted to qualify as well before I became a rodeo queen. I guess not before I became a rodeo queen, but growing up, I did both. But I knew that when I went to compete for a national title like Miss Rodeo USA, it was going to take every ounce of energy and money and everything I had to pursue that and to achieve that. And so I had sold my, rope horse and just really dedicated myself to that. So then whenever I finished my years Miss Rodeo USA, I went to fire selling leather dresses and colored jeans and just really working to get back in the game. Had to find a horse, and there was a lot of stuff that went on behind the scenes. But fast forward, and I qualified for that International Finals Rodeo in January of 2012. Whenever I got to back in the box there at the Jim Norick Arena in Oklahoma City, I just had this overwhelming feeling of watching a group of people believe in something before there was really any tried and true evidence, if you will, that it was going to work. But it was an idea that these people, so many producers, stock contractors, Dale Jurgen of the IPRA, so many people, they got behind it. And it was just an incredible feeling to know that I got to play a really small part in that. And then I got to actually be there and rope. That year taught me so much about when you have something laid on you that you feel like can make a difference in the lives of others, even if people look at you funny and don't believe in what you're doing or anything like that, you just got to keep pressing forward. You got to keep sharing those ideas. That's when that all go and no woe mentality, you got to kick it up a notch, because there's going to be plenty of folks tell you that you can't, but there's going to be a handful of folks that if you keep sharing that idea, that they're not only going to get on board, they're going to breathe that belief back into you and encourage you to keep going and sharing it. So that year taught me a lot about just not giving up on something and just keep going back and sharing ideas and getting people on board. And just what an incredible outcome you can have when everybody works together. Couple of years later, I got the career opportunity that I feel like a lot of people wait around for, and pray for a lifetime. I moved into a sales position at Ariat International. It's a position I still have today. And that happened in January of 2014. And at the same time, a relationship that I'd been in for about a year and a half that I was really invested in, it came to an abrupt halt. And when I say abrupt, I mean abrupt. So basically my career was taking off and my love life went up in flames. I was excited and heartbroken all at the same time. I threw myself into work and not really knowing what else to do with all my extra time. That's what I did. I worked all the time. And just to kind of put in perspective, I left 1 week for work, preparing and making my grocery list and all this stuff, things I was going to get done out on the road. And then I got back 10 days later to this little ready-made family idea, this life I'd been living, it was gone. It wasn't there anymore. And, I just, at that point, that had been one of the hardest things I dealt with. I felt like in my adult life of just being at this, I'm not going to call it a crossroads, but I really thought I was headed in a direction where God wanted me to be. And I had one part of my life that was really taking shape. I finally had this true career that I felt at home in and I was passionate about and I knew that I could do well at. But then this other part of my life was falling apart. And I didn't understand it at the time. It didn't make any sense to me, but I just put my nose down and I went to work. And that's what I did in that year, that season of my life. I just worked really, really hard and I prayed a whole lot. And like I said, it didn't make sense. until literally a year later. And in January of 2015, the hardest chapter of my life came about. I mean, it hit me like a Mack truck. At the time, I was living in Oklahoma. I had my middle brother. He was working in Louisiana, living there. And then my youngest brother was a senior in high school. And like I said, I grew up in Alabama. So that's where him and my mom and, the rest of my family, they were located in Alabama. And I got a call. And, long story short, my mom was healthy. She was 55 years old, and she passed away unexpectedly from a pulmonary embolism. And from that point forward, and a lot of you listening, or, maybe not a lot of you, maybe a handful of you, I'm not sure, but I feel like we've all probably had parts in our life that you think about your life before that happened, and you think about your life after that happened, and the person you were before that happened, and the person you became after it happened. And this was that moment for me, was in January of 2015 when my mom passed away. And just a few of the things that happened, I moved back to Alabama for a 6-month period. Me and my middle brother did, so that we could allow my youngest brother to finish high school, out where he was at, to let that be one normal thing that we could keep happening. I'm so grateful that my job, at Area, they allowed me to work remotely, and just all the things. They gave me a lot of grace during that whole process. And I learned through that so many life lessons, as you do, when life hits you hard and it really brings you to your knees. That's when I have always found myself just clinging to God more than anything else. I was really, really fortunate to have incredible friends and family and support that, that it still lasts until now. Because when something like that happens to you, it doesn't just go away or change overnight. It's something you live with for the rest of your life. And through all of it, one of the things that became very, very clear to me about that relationship that had come to abrupt halt the year before is that, had I had anything in my life besides, my job, I was really focused on my career at that point, but I didn't have anything else holding me back or keeping me tied down that would keep me from making the decisions that were best for me and my brothers at that time of loss. I was able to just step into a role where I was needed in Alabama. I picked up everything and could leave and go back and be very present in that moment, because I wasn't married. I didn't have a family, to take care of in Oklahoma. There were, and so through that time of loss is when I really went, okay, God, I see why you took this away. I'm sure there were other reasons there, mainly that I wasn't the person for that guy and he wasn't the person for me, because I went on to meet my husband, who I'm so, so grateful for, and just how God's timing was perfect in that whole process. But, so much growth and change and heartache, and happiness as well came about, in my life from, over the past decade. And it wasn't all because it was easy. There were some really tough times in there, like when I lost my mom, but God never walked away. And so, here I am, year 2015, just really wondering, what's next, God? Like I've I've basically, picked up my life and moved here. and then I'm going to move back to Oklahoma, but like, how do I start over? And I just wasn't really open to anything other than keeping my nose down and going to work at that point in my life. I had a few friends that wanted to introduce me to some people, and I just wasn't having it. I just didn't have space in my heart yet to open up or to give of myself in any possible way at that point. And so then in January of 2016, I started dating my husband, now my husband. And so much had changed in that year. And where a year before I thought, gosh, I don't know where my life's headed. It became very, very clear for me just a year later that God had put this man in my life that I'd we'll talk about this on another episode, but I knew from that very first week in January, whenever Tyler and I got to spend a little bit more time together. We'd met at the end of December of 2015, but we spent some more time together beginning of January, and I knew then that if he'd keep me, I was going to marry this guy. And he decided a few months later he wanted to keep me, I think. And then the following January in 2017, we got engaged. And so I'm not good at making long stories short, and I appreciate y'all hanging with me as I took you through basically the past decade of my life right here. But, then we got married in 2017 and had our little boy in February of 2019. And that was really the turning point for me, you guys, when I realized that, because with motherhood, and I can only speak from my perspective, but I have friends that aren't on their motherhood journey yet, that have that desire to be. Some of them don't have that desire to be, but I know that they've had other moments that have stopped them in their tracks and made them realize that they had to start doing something for themselves to be the better version of themselves. And for me, motherhood, it just brought forth a whole new layer of emotions and feelings in my life. And like I said, that's when I realized that to truly be the best version of myself for me and my family and my friends, I had to figure out a way that I could really get a hold and embrace how to start implementing space and grace in my life. For years, it'd been easy for me to do it for other people, but it'd been a struggle to do it for myself. And while I am a work in progress, and I feel like this is, it's a race I don't plan to ever be finished with, I can promise you that once you decide to get pointed in the right direction and pretty much head up that alleyway, it'll change your life. It really will. And one of the biggest questions I get asked, and I'm going to end on this note, is how I do all these things, as a mom and having a full-time career, and how do I juggle it all? And, in 2020, I really started to focus again and take action on some ideas and dreams that I'd kind of just put up on the shelf for me to, work on someday. And I was like, no, it needs to be now. Like, I need to start taking action on these things. And so that's really spurred on that idea to some people, like, how do you do it all? How do you have a podcast? How are you starting to write books for children? Like, how are you doing all these different things and also being a wife and a mom and taking care of your career, your job that actually makes money at this point? And those are all really valid, very valid questions. And my answer is, I think sometimes we just need to see somebody else taking action and giving ourselves a visual, a story that we can hold on to of, how do you do it all? And I guess part of the way that I'm wired is, from watching my mom for so many years, and this story comes to mind when I start thinking. Sometimes when I get overwhelmed, I'm like, how am I going to do it all? How am I going to do it all? When I was in high school rodeo, we high school rodeoed in Alabama, and there were a couple of different multi-state rodeos that were held in Georgia and Florida and Tennessee. But there was this one rodeo every year that counted. It was 2 separate rodeos in one weekend, and it was held in Marianna, Florida. And Marianna, Florida was about a 2.5 to 3 hour drive from our house. That rodeo, from the time I was in 9th grade until I graduated, it fell the same weekend as a basketball tournament. And I really love basketball and was a big part of our team. Most people would have made their child choose, hey, you're either going to be at the tournament or we're going to go to this rodeo. But my mom didn't do that. She knew that I had committed to being on this basketball team, and I was part of that team. She also knew that I was putting in the time and the effort to be prepared, to keep my horses in shape and go to those rodeos and compete. And so we just figured out a way to do it. And that, honestly, like, if there were enough hours in the day, she figured out a way to get it done. And after watching her for so many years, just like that weekend, every year for 4 years, I'd play in the tournament on Friday evening. We'd drive to Marianna, Florida. I'd rodeo in the slack that morning. We'd drive back to go to the tournament that evening in Grady, Alabama. One year it was in Taugaville. It didn't matter. If there were enough hours in the day and it was physically possible for us to get there and do it, we did it. And that's just how she handled life. And so when I think about how am I going to get it all done, sometimes I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to find these little pockets of time, and don't let being in the middle of motherhood discourage you from going after some different goals and dreams and ideas you have, because it's not going to look the same for everybody. You might get 20 minutes here or 30 minutes there to work on something and then have to put it down and come back to it. But if it's something that you really care about and you feel called to do, I just want to encourage you to figure it out. Figure out how you can fit it in, because it'll be worth it. It's going to be a blessing to you. It's going to be a blessing to others as you step into that. So, guys, thank y'all so much for tuning in today, for listening to a little bit more of my story. And I'd love to answer any questions you have. Let me hear your feedback. And I hope you go forward from this episode with a little more clarity on how you can apply space and grace into your own lives. Be blessed, y'all.
Thank you for spending your time with me on the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm so glad y'all stopped by. If you could take a moment to share this episode and tag us on social media, I'd be happier than a cowgirl in a sea of buy one, get one vintage turquoise. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. New episodes will be released bi-monthly. Please leave us a review if you feel so led by going to iTunes. Your feedback will really help us breed the idea of grabbing life by the horns with a cowgirl state of mind into women across the globe. Some that may have never even had the privilege to throw their leg over a horse, but could most certainly use the cowgirl state of mind while navigating life. Thanks again, y'all. Until next time, keep pursuing your dreams with that all go and no woe mentality. Remember, you're writing a story that's worth saddling up for, sister.